Hello, hello, and welcome to our third reading of City of Thieves. I'm your host Buddha, and just want to say, having a hard time sleeping out there. Um, Curl yourself up and go to sleep. It's that simple. Don't struggle. Don't fight it. Allow yourself to go into that great good night. And without further ado, we should be getting on with the book. Realize I should probably do like a summary of what happened last time. Lev. He, after, what was it? After they left the cannibals, they tried to go somewhere to stay for the night in Peter. And they tried to go to Lev's like old apartment, but it got blown to smithereens by the Germans, so they ended up meeting this girl named Sonia at New Kolya. They hang out for a bit. They tail a lead that they heard the first time they got there, a little quest about an old man with chickens on his like roof and shit. Turns out there was only one chicken, and it wasn't a chicken, it was a rooster. So, what was it? So that didn't work out. But Sonia had family up in this place called Maga. It's like a rural town, so they're going there to see if there's any chickens there. But it's been taken over by Germans, so they're worried about being behind enemy lines and whatnot, but they're gonna get these fucking eggs. So they don't. They're as good as dead anyway. So let's begin. Chapter 12. Outside of Leningrad, the trees still grew. Crows muttered on birch branches, squirrels raced between the firs. The squirrels looked fat and innocent, easy targets for a man with a pistol. They were lucky to live in occupied Russia. We marched through the woods, through open fields of cold sunshine, keeping the train tracks visible to our left. The snow was hard-packed, scattered with pine needles, decent for walking. We were in the German-controlled territory, but there was no indication of a German presence, no sign at all of war. I was strangely happy. Peter was my home. Peter was a graveyard now, a city full of ghosts and cannibals. Walking in the countryside, I felt a physical change, as if I were breathing pure oxygen after months at the bottom of a coal mine. The tangles in my gut uncoiled, my ears unclogged. With strength in my legs I hadn't felt for months. Kolya seemed affected in the same way. He squinted in the glare of the snow, pursing his lips to blow great gusts of vapor, as delighted by this trick as a 5-year-old. Spotting a green scrap of paper near the trunk of an grand old birch, he bent down to pick it up. It looked normal enough. A 10-ruble banknote, Lenin's eyes glaring at us from beneath his broad bald head, except that 10-ruble notes were gray, not green. Counterfeit? I asked. Kolya nodded, pointing to the sky with one finger as he scrutinized the bill. It drops them by the bushel. The more counterfeit notes floating around, the less the real ones are worth. But it's not even the right color. Kolya flipped the note around and read aloud the printed text on the other side. The prices for food items and the necessities of daily life have increased enormously, and the black market in the Soviet Union is flourishing. Flourishing is spelled wrong, by the way. party functionaries and Jews are working dark deals at home, while you at the front office have to sacrifice your life for these criminal. That's nice. They occupy half the country and they can't even find someone who speaks the language? Soon you'll see the reason. Soon. So keep this 10 ruble note. It will guarantee your safe return to a free Russia after the war. Polya grinned and glanced up at me. You were working some dark deals, Lev Abramovich? I wish. They think these things will turn us? Don't they understand? He invented propaganda. All this is bad tactics. They're irritating. The people they're trying to convert. Young man thinks he's found a 10 ruble note. He's happy. Maybe he can buy an extra slice of sausage, but no, it's not money. It's a poorly spelled surrender coupon. He speared the note on a tree branch and set it on fire with his lighter. You're burning your chance to come back to a free Russia after the war, I told him. Kolya smiled as he watched the note blacken and curl. Come on, we have a long way to go. For another hour, slogging through the snow, Kolya prodded me in the shoulder with his gloved fingers. Do Jews believe in the afterlife? The day before, the question would have annoyed me. Right then it seemed funny. So perfectly Kolya, asked with genuine curiosity, and a pros of nothing. It depends on the Jew. My father was an atheist. And your mother? My mother is not Jewish. Ah, you're a half-breed. No shame in that. I've always thought I had gypsy blood in me from somewhere up the stream. I looked up at him. His eyes as blue as a husky's, a smattering of blonde hair showing from beneath the black fur cap. You don't have gypsy blood. What, the eyes? Plenty of blue-eyed gypsies in the world. My friend. Anyway, the New Testament's very clear about the whole thing. You follow Jesus, you go to heaven. You don't, you're off to hell. But the Old Testament, I don't even remember if there's a hell in the Old Testament. Sheol. What? The underworld is called Sheol. One of my father's poems is called The Bars of Sheol. It was very odd to speak openly about my father and his work. The words themselves seemed unsafe, as if I were confessing a crime and the authorities might hear. Even here, where the lit borough had no sway, I worried about getting caught, worried about spies lurking in the arches. If my mother was still around, she would have silenced me with a look. Still, it was good to talk about him. It made me happy that poems were referred to in the present tense, even when the poet is in the past tense. What happens in Sheol? They punish you for your sins? I don't think so. Everyone goes there. Doesn't matter if you're good or bad. It's just dark and cold and nothing left but our shadows. Sounds about right. He scooped up a handful of clean snow and then took a bite, let it melt in his mouth. A few weeks ago, I saw a soldier with no eyelids. He was a tank commander. His tank broke down somewhere in the worst of it. And by the time they found him, the other boys in the tank were dead from the cold, and he had frostbite over half his body, lost some toes and some fingers, a bit of his nose, his eyelids. I saw him sleeping in the infirmary. Thought he was dead. His eyes were wide open. I don't know if you can call them open if there's no way to shut them. How do you stay sane with no eyelids? You have to go the rest of your life without ever once closing your eyes. I'd rather be blind. I had not seen Kolya so morose before. Sudden shift in his mood made me anxious. Both of us heard the howling at the same time. We turned and looked through the crooked avenues of birch trees. Is that a dog? He nodded. Sounds like it. A few seconds later, we heard a howl again. There's something terribly human in its loneliness. We needed to keep walking to the east. We needed to reach Maga by nightfall. Akolia headed off towards the crying dog, and I followed without arguing. The snow was deeper here, and soon we were wading through thigh-high drifts. The energy I had felt 10 minutes before began to seep away. I was tired again, battling for each step forward. Akolia slowed his pace so that I could keep up. If he was impatient with me, he didn't show it. I had my head down so I could choose each footfall. A twisted ankle was certain death now. I saw tread marks before Kolya. I grabbed his sleeve to stop him. We were at the edge of the vast clearing of the woods. The glare of sunlight off the hectares of snow was bright enough that I could shield my eyes with my hand. Wait a minute. The snow had been corrugated by dozens of tank treads, as if an entire panzer brigade had passed through. I didn't know the treads the way I knew German airplane engines, but couldn't tell a German Sturm Tigers from a Russian T-34s, but I knew these weren't our tanks. We would have already broken the blockade if we had this much armor in the woods. Gray and brown heaps lay scattered across the snow. At first, I thought they were discarded coats, but I saw a tail on one, an outstretched paw on another, and I realized they were dead dogs, at least a dozen of them. We heard a howl, and finally we saw the howler, a black and white sheepdog dragging itself off the field, its front legs doing the work its hind legs could not. Behind the wounded animal was a blood-smeared trail more than 100 meters long, a red brushstroke slapped across a white canvas. "Someone," said Kolya, stepping into the field before I could stop him. The tanks were gone. They had been here recently. The tracks were still cleanly defined in the snow, unblurred by the wind. The Germans were near in force, but Kolya didn't care. He was already in the middle of the clearing, marching toward the sheepdog, and as usual, I hurried to catch up. "Don't get too close to any of them," he told me. I don't know why he told me that. Was he worried about the disease? Did he think a dying dog might bite me? When we got closer to the sheepdog, I could see that a wood box was strapped to its back, held in place with a leather harness. A wood post extended up from the box. I glanced around the field and saw that all the other dogs wore the same contraptions. The sheepdog did not look at us. He was intent on reaching the fringe of the trees on the far side of the field, where he thought he could find safety or comfort or a quiet place to die. Blood dribbled from the 2 bullet holes near his hip, and another must have pierced his belly. Something wet and coiled was dragged along beneath him. Innards never meant to see the daylight. He panted, his long pink tongue dangling from the side of his mouth, his black lips curling from his yellowing teeth. "They're mines," said Kolya. "They teach them to find food underneath tanks' armor, and then they starve them. And when the panzers come, they let them loose. Boom." Except none of the dogs had gone boom. The Germans clearly knew all about it. They'd warned their gunners, and their gunners were good shots. Dead dogs littered the field, but there were no tank carcasses, no upended armored cars, no explosions at all. It was another ingenious Russian ploy that had failed completely, as all of the Russian ploys had failed. And I pictured the hungry dogs sprinting towards the panzers, their paws kicking up fantails of snow, their eyes bright and happy as they raced for their first meal in weeks. "Give me your knife. Be careful. Give it to me." I pulled the German dagger from its sheath and handed it to him. The sheepdog kept trying to drag his gutted self towards the woods, but he was losing strength in his front legs. He finally quit when he saw Koya approaching, as if he had decided that this was far enough. He lay in the blood-wet snow, staring up at Koya with weary brown eyes. The wood posts stuck straight up from the box. On his back, like the mast of a sailboat. It seemed a flimsy thing, no thicker than a drumstick. "You're my good boy," said Kolya, kneeling beside the sheepdog, holding the back of the dog's head steady with his left hand. "You're my good boy." Kolya cut the dog's throat with one motion. The dog shuddered, the blood pouring from him, steaming in the cold air. Kolya lowered the dog's head gently to the ground, where he continued to twitch for a few seconds, pawing at nothing, like a dreaming puppy. And then he was dead. We were silent for a moment, giving our respect to a fallen dog. Kolya wiped the sides of the bloody blade on the snow, dried it on the sleeve of his overcoat, and handed it back to me. "We just lost 40 minutes. Walk fast." Chapter 13. We marched at double time through the birch forest. Railroad tracks to our left, sun tumbling fast from the sky. Kolya hadn't spoken since the field of dead dogs. I could tell he was worried about the time. He had miscalculated our speed, how fast we could walk across snow-covered terrain, and our detour had ruined any chances of making Maga by nightfall. The cold was a greater danger than the Germans now, and the temperature was already dropping fast. Without shelter, we would die. We hadn't seen a human being since saying farewell to the Tartar sergeant, and we kept our distance from the abandoned railway stations of Kolonoye, Ryanio, and Dubrovnica. Even from 200 meters away, we could see the toppled statue of Lenin outside the Dubrovka station. The black graffiti spray painted on the concrete wall. "Stalin ist tot, Ruslan ist tot, I sind tot." At 3 in the afternoon, the sun dipped below the western hills, and the brooding gray clouds above us flared orange. I heard the whine of airplane engines and looked up to see 4 Messerschmitts racing towards Leningrad. So high above us, they seemed harmless as fruit flies. I wondered what buildings they would flatten, or if they'd be shot down by our boys on the ground, or our pilots in the air. It seemed wonderfully abstract to me. Somebody else's war. Wherever they dropped their bombs, it wouldn't be on me. When I realized that the thought was my own, I felt a surge of guilt. The selfish shit I had become. We were walking past Berezovka, a name I'd first heard in September when the Red Army and the Wehrmacht clashed outside the village. According to the newspapers, our boys fought with great valor and tactical brilliance, outfoxing the German commanders and frustrating Hitler himself, who followed each development from his war room in Berlin. Everyone in Leningrad knew how to read a newspaper article. The Russian forces were always calm and determined. The Germans were always stunned by the fury of our resistance. These phrases were mandatory. Key information came from the bottom of each article, tucked away inside the closing paragraph. If our men withdrew to reserve our fighting strength, we had lost the battle. The troops gladly sacrificed to repel the enemy invaders. We had been massacred. Berezovka was a massacre. According to the papers, the village was famous for its church, built on direct order of Peter himself, and a bridge where Pushkin challenged a rival to a duel. These landmarks were gone. Berezovka was gone. A few fire-blackened walls still stood above the snow. Not for that, there would be no sign that a village had ever existed. They are fools, said Kolya as we skirted around the hamlet's touched remnants. I looked up at him, not sure whom he meant. The Germans, they think they're so efficient, the greatest war machine ever built. But you look at history, you read the books. The best conquerors always gave their enemies a way out. You could fight Genghis Khan and get your head lopped off, or you could submit and pay him taxes. That's an easy choice. With the Germans, you can fight them and get killed, or you can surrender and get killed. They could have turned half this country against the other half, but they don't have subtlety. They don't understand the Russian mind. They just burn everything. What Kolya said was true enough, as far as it went, but it's but it seemed to me that the Nazis had no interest in subtle invasion. They didn't want to change anyone's mind, at least no one among the inferior races. The Russians were a mongrel people, spawned by hordes of Vikings and Huns, raped by generations of Avars and Khazars, Kipchaks and Penichegs, Mongols and Swedes, infested by gypsies and Jews and far-roaming Turks. We were the children of 1,000 lost battles, and defeat was heavy in us. We no longer deserved to exist. The Germans believed in the lesson of Darwin's mockingbirds. Life must adapt or die. They had adapted to brute reality. We mixed race drunks on the Russian steppes had not. We were doomed. The Germans only paying attention. Oh, the Germans only playing their mandated role in human evolution. I didn't say any of that, though. All I said was, they gave the French a way out. All the Frenchmen with their balls died on the way home from Moscow in 1812. You think I'm joking? Listen, 133 years ago, they had the best army in the world. Now, they're the whores of Europe, just waiting to be fucked by whoever comes along with their hard coffee. Am I wrong? So what happened to them? Borodino, Leipzig, Waterloo. Think about it. Courage got blasted out of their gene pool. Their lethal genius Napoleon castrated the whole country. We're losing the light. He glanced up at the sky. If he comes to it, we can build a dugout and make it through till morning. He walked faster, accelerated our already quick pace, and I knew that I couldn't keep up for much longer. Last night's soup was a delicious memory. The sergeant's gift of a ration of bread had been devoured before noon. Each footstep was an effort now, as if my boots had been lined with lead. It was already so cold I could feel it in my teeth. The cheap fillings plugging my cavities shrunk when the temperature dipped low. But I couldn't feel my fingertips enough. I couldn't feel my fingertips through I what but I couldn't feel my fingertips even though I wore thick wool mittens and had shoved my hands into my pockets of my overcoat. Nor could I feel the tip of my nose. What a good joke that would be. I spent most of my adolescence wishing for a smaller nose. A few more hours in the woods and I wouldn't have a nose. We're going to build a dugout. With what? You brought the shovel? You still have hands, don't you? And the knife? We need to get inside somewhere. Polya made a great show of looking around the darkening woods, as if a doorway might have been hidden in the tall pines. There is no inside, he said. You're a soldier now. I've drafted you, and soldiers sleep wherever they close their eyes. That's very beautiful, but we need to get inside. He placed his gloved hand on my chest for a second. I thought he was angry with me, insulted by my unwillingness to brave the winter night and outdoors. But he wasn't admonishing me, he was making me stand still. He gestured with his chin to an access road that ran parallel to the tracks. It was a few hundred meters away, and the shadows were growing deeper. There was still enough light to see a Russian soldier standing with his back to us, his rifle slung over his shoulder. Partisan? I whispered. No, he's regular army. Maybe we've taken Berezovka back. Counterattack? Maybe, whispered Kolya. We crept closer to the sentry, treading carefully. We didn't know any passwords, and no one with a rifle would wait to see if we were truly Russian. Comrade! Shouted Kolya. When we were 50 meters away, his hands raised above his head. I raised mine too. Don't shoot! We're here on special orders. The sentry did not turn. Many soldiers had lost their hearing in the last few months. Exploding shells had ruptured thousands of eardrums. Kolya and I exchanged a glance and walked closer. The soldier stood knee-deep in snow. He was far too still. No living man could pose like a statue in cold this severe. I turned full circle, scanning the woods, convinced this was a trap. Nothing moved, but the birch branches in the wind. I walked up to the soldier. He must have been a brute in his day, with his bulging brow and his wrists thick as axe handles. But he'd been dead for days. His paper-white skin wrapped too tightly around his skull, ready to split. A neat little bullet hole, crusted with frozen blood, punched through his cheek just below his left eye, a wood sign hanging from his neck and a wire loop. The phrase, Proletera, Allier, Lander, Vereniat Uyuk, spelled out with a black marker. I didn't speak German, nor could I read it, but I knew the phrase, as did every boy and girl in Russia who had suffered through endless lectures on dialectical materialism. Workers of all lands unite. I pulled the sign off the dead soldier's neck, careful not to let the ice-cold wire brush against his face. And tossed it away. Kolya unfastened the strap of his rifle and inspected the weapon, a Mosin Nagant, with a crooked bolt. He tried it a few times, shook his head, and let it drop to the ground. The soldier wore a hip holster with a Tarkarev pistol. The leather lanyard ran through a loophole in the hilt of the gun, securing it to the holster. The man was an officer, a pistol waver. The Tokarev wasn't meant for the Germans. It was meant for Russians who refused to advance. Kolya drew the automatic, untied the lanyard, checked the pistol's butt, and saw that the magazine had been taken. The ammo loops in the officer's belt were empty too. Kolya unbuttoned the man's coat and found what he was looking for, a burlap pouch with a steel-buckled leather strap. Sometimes we put them under our coats at night, he said, opening the pouch and grabbing 3 pistol magazines. The buckle's too shiny, reflects the moonlight. He slammed one of the magazines home and tried the action, satisfied the pistol was sound. He stuffed it and the extra ammunition into his overcoat pocket. He tried to pull the dead man out of the snow, but he was frozen into the ground, as rooted as a tree. Dusk was leaching all the colors from the forest. The night was almost on us. There was no more time to spare for corpses. We hurried east, walking close to the tracks now, hoping that any Germans moving through the frozen woods would be in vehicles and easy to hear from a distance. The crows had quit cawing, and the wind had stopped blowing. The only sounds were our boots sinking into the snow, and the distant anthemic beat of motor cells falling around Pitter. I tried to hide my face behind the wool of my scarf and the collar of my overcoat. Tried to use the warmth of my breath to heat my cheeks. Kolya stamped his gloved hands together and pulled his black fur cap down so low it must have almost covered his eyes. A few kilometers east of Berizoka, we walked along the perimeter of each of the large farm. The undulating fields of snow, demarked with low stone walls, hay bales big as igloos sat abandoned in the fields. Just interrupted. The farmers fled to the east or dead. An old stone farmhouse stood at the far edge of the farm, protected from the northern wind by a copse of larch trees 50 meters high. Firelight shone through the mulined windows, warm and buttery, spilling onto the snow in front of the house. Black smoke plumed from the chimney, barely visible as a curling smudge against the dark blue sky. It looked like it was almost inviting. It looked like the most inviting house ever built. The country residence of the Emperor's favorite general, heated and well stocked for Christmas, with everyone's favorite smoked meats and pastries. I looked up at Kolya as I trudged through the snow. He shook his head, but never took his eyes off the farmhouse. And I could see the longing in his expression. It's a bad idea, he said. It's a better idea than freezing to death on the way to Maga. Who do you think is in there? Country gentleman sitting by the fire, petting his dog? You think we're in fucking Tungarev? You think we're in a fucking Tungarev story? Every house in town was burned down. This one's still standing. What happened? They got lucky? It's Germans in there. The officers, probably. We're going to storm the house with a pistol and a knife? If we keep walking, we're dead. If we go to the house and the Germans are there, we're dead. But if it's not Germans, let's say they're Russians, he said. That means the Germans let them stay there, which means they're working with the Germans, which means they're the enemy. So we can appropriate food from the enemy, can't we? And a bed? Listen, Liv. I know you're tired. I know you're cold. But trust me. Trust a soldier. This won't work. I'm not going any farther. I'd rather take the chance on the farmhouse. There might be a place in the next town. How do you know there is a next town? The last one is in ashes. How much farther to Maga? Another 15 kilometers? Maybe you can make it, but I can't. Kolya sighed, rubbing his face with the back of his leather glove, trying to get some circulation going. I concede that we're not going to make the Maga. That's no longer an issue. I've known that for hours. You didn't want to tell me about it. How far away are we? Far. The bad news is, I don't think we're going the right way. What do you mean? Kolya was still looking at the farmhouse, and I had to shove him to get his attention. What do you mean we're not going the right way? We should have crossed the Neva hours ago, and I don't think Berezovka is on the Maga line. You don't think? Why didn't you say anything? I didn't want you to panic. It was too dark to see the expression on the stupid Cossack face. You told me Mega was on the Moscow line. It is. You told me all we have to do is follow the Moscow tracks and they'll take us to Mega. Yes, all true. So where the fuck are we? Berezovka. I took a deep breath. I longed for powerful fists so I could pulp his skull. What's the good news? Pardon? You said the bad news is we're going the wrong way. There isn't any good news. Just because there's bad news doesn't mean there's good news too. There was nothing left to say, so I started walking to the farmhouse. The moon rose above the treetops. The ice-skinned snow snapped beneath my boots, and if a German sniper was targeting my head, I wished him good aim. I was hungry, but I knew how to deal with my hunger. We were all experts at dealing with hunger. The cold was brutal, but I was used to the cold too. But my legs were quitting on me. Before the war, they were weak, poorly suited for running and jumping, and wherever else legs were meant for. Siege has whittled them down to broomsticks. Even if we had been on the right path to Maga, I never could have made it. I couldn't have walked another 5 minutes. Halfway to the farmhouse, Polya caught up with me. He'd pulled out the Tokarev pistol and held it in a gloved hand. If we're going to do this, he said, we don't have to be stupid about it. He led me behind the house and made me wait on the back porch under the eave where the fire hood was stacked safe and dry. A 3 kilo tin of beluga caviar would not have seemed more luxurious at that moment than the neatly stacked firewood rising in crisscross formations higher than my head. Polya crept over to a frosted window and peeked inside the sleek black fur of his astrakhan cap, shimmering in the firelight. Inside the house, music played on a phonograph, jazz, piano, and something American. Who's in there? I whispered. He held up his palm to silence me. He seemed transfixed by whatever he saw, and I wondered if we had stumbled across more cannibals out in the snowy depths of the country, or more likely, mutilated remains of a family who once lived there. Kolya had dealt with cannibals before, and he had seen plenty of corpses. This was something new, something unexpected, and after another 30 seconds, I disobeyed his order and joined him at the window, careful not to brush off any icicles hanging from the lintel. I crouched beside him and peered over the bottom edge of the glass. 2 girls in nightshirts danced to the jazz recording. They were lovely and young, no older than me. The blonde leading the brunette. She was very pale, her throat and cheeks watched with freckles, her eyebrows and eyelashes so light they appeared unseen edgewise. The dark-haired girl was smaller, clumsy, unable to find the rhythm of the syncopation. Her teeth too big for her mouth, and her arms were too chubby, creased at the wrists like a baby's. You wouldn't have noticed her in peacetime. Strolling down the Nevsky, there was something wildly exotic about a plump girl. Somebody with power loved her and kept her fed. I was so dazzled by the sight of the dancing girls that I didn't realize that for a moment they were not alone. 2 more girls lay on their bellies with a black bearskin rug in front of the fireplace. Both had their chins propped on their hands, their elbows on the rug, watching the dance with serious expressions on their faces. One looked Chechen, her black eyebrows nearly meeting above her nose, her lips painted a bright red, her hair piled up in a wet towel above her head as if she had just bathed. The other girl had the long, elegant neck of a ballerina, her nose a perfect right angle in profile, her brown hair tied back in tight pigtails. The interior of the farmhouse looked more like a hunting lodge. Heads of dead animals festooned the walls of the great room. Brown bear, wild bear, and ibex, with massive curling horns and a scruffy chin beard, a stuffed wolf, and lynx flanked the fireplace, poised in mid-prowl, their mouths open and fangs glistening white, candles burned in wall scones. Polya and I crouched outside the window and stared at the scene until the song ended and the Chechen-looking girl got up to change the record. I'll play that one again, said the blonde. Her voice was muffled by the glass, but it was easy to hear her. Not again, please, said her partner. Something I know. Put on Eddie Rosner. I turned to look at Kolya, expected him to be grinning, ecstatic about the surreal vision we'd stumbled across in the middle of the snowy wasteland. But he looked grim, his lips pressed together, something angry in his eyes. Come on, he said, standing and leading me back around to the front of the house. A new record had started playing, more jazz, a trumpeter leading his band on a merry charge. We're going in? I think they had food in there. I thought I saw some. I'm sure they have plenty of food. He knocked on the front door. The music stopped playing. A few seconds later, the blonde girl appeared behind the mullioned. It's like a double word. A few seconds later, the blonde girl appeared behind the mullioned window in the doorway. She stared at us for a long time without saying anything or making any move toward the door. We're Russian, said Kolya. Open the door. She shook her head. You shouldn't be here. I know, he said, holding up the pistol so the girl could see it. But we are, so open the door. God damn your mother. The blonde looked back toward the great room. She whispered something to someone standing out of sight and listened to the response. Nodding, she turned to look to us again, took a deep breath, and opened the door. Stepping inside this farmhouse felt like entering the belly of a whale, the warmest place I'd known in months. We followed the blonde into the great room. Her and three friends stood in an uneasy line, fingers fidgeting with the hems of their nightshirts. The little brunette with the chubby arms looked ready to cry. Her lower lip quivered as she stared at Kolya's pistol. Is anyone else here? The blonde shook her head. When are they coming? He asked. The girls exchanged glances. Who? Asked one who looked like Chechen. Don't play with me, ladies. I'm an officer in the Red Army. I'm on special orders. Is he an officer too? As a blonde, looking at me. She wasn't smiling quite, but I could see the amusement in her eyes. No, he's not an officer. He's an enlisted man. An enlisted man? Really? How old are you, sweetness? All the girls were looking at me now. In the warmth of the room, under the weight of their stares, I could feel my blood rushing to my face. 19, I said, standing very straight. 20 in April. You're a little for 19, said the Chechen girl. 15 at best, said the blonde. Kolya racked the pistol slide, chambering a bullet, a dramatic sound in the quiet room. The gesture seemed overly theatrical to me, but Kolya had a way of pulling off theatrical gestures. He kept the pistol pointed at the floor and looked at each girl's face, taking his time with each one. We've come a long way, he said. My friend here is tired. I'm tired. So I'll ask you again, one last time. When are they coming? They usually come around midnight, said the chubby brunette. The other girls watched her closely, said nothing. After they're finished with the shelling. Is that right? So after the Germans got bored firing their artillery at all of us in Peter, they come here for a night and you take care of them? In certain ways, I am deeply stupid. I didn't say this out of modesty. I believe that I'm more intelligent than the average human being, though perhaps intelligence should not be looked at as a single gauge, like a speedometer, but as full array of tachometers, odometers, altimeters, and the rest. My father taught me how to read when I was 4, which he always bragged about to his friends. But my inability to learn French or remember the dates of Surovov's victories must have troubled him. He was a true polymath, able to recite any stanza of Eugene Onegin at command, fluent in French and English, good enough at theoretical physics, that his professors at university considered his abduction to poetry a minor tragedy. I wish they had been more charismatic, his professor. I wish they had taught him the constellation of physics, explained to their star student why the shape of the universe and the weight of light were more important than unrhymed verses on the swindlers and abortionists of Leningrad. My father would have known what was happening in that farmhouse the moment he looked through the window, even at 17. So I felt like an idiot when I finally realized why these girls were here, who was feeding them, and making sure they had enough firewood stacked beneath the eaves. The blonde girl glared at Kolya, her nostrils flaring, her skin flushing beneath her freckles. You, he said, and for a moment she didn't say anything else. Her anger was too intense to articulate. You walk in here and condemn us, the Red Army hero? Where have you been? You and your army. The Germans came and burned everything. And where was your army? They shot my little brothers, my father, my grandfather, every man in town. While you and your friends cowered somewhere else? You come here and point your gun at me. I'm not pointing my gun at anybody, said Kolya. It was a strangely meek comment coming from him, and I knew he had already lost the fight. I would do anything to protect my sister, she continued, nodding at the chubby brunette. Anything at all. You were supposed to protect us, the glorious Red Army, defenders of the people. Where were you? We've been fighting them. You can't protect anyone. You abandon us. If we don't live in the city, we can't be important, is that it? We let them have the peasants, is that it? Half the men in my unit died fighting. Half? If I was general, all of my soldiers would die before I let a single Nazi in our country. Well, said Kolya. And for several seconds, he said nothing else. Finally, he pocketed his automatic. I'm glad you're not the general. Holy shit. I am like really tired. Usually I like to go for 2 hours, but I'm just really tired right now. So, what I'm gonna do... Shit, so... I'm going to... music on. I'm gonna have it pretty low. And, yeah. I'm sorry. I wish I could have read longer, but... The sleep is hitting me for some reason. So... I'm just gonna play this for a little bit longer. And I hope that at least a little bit of my reading helped anyone who came through sleep. Because I know it's helping me. I'm fucking exhausted. And so, without further ado, Buddha is out. Good night, and sleep well.